Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We are joined today by Josh Adams, Athletic Director at Gilroy High School. Coach, thanks for jumping on. Finally, it's been like 2 years I've been chasing you.
Try to. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad it worked out. Glad to be here.
All right, let's dive in. Take me through your background. How'd you get into adult athletics? Let's call it coaching, teaching,
Yeah,
administrating,
yeah,
all,
yeah.
all the stuff. Go through the whole journey, start to
Yeah,
finish.
so I actually started from the bottom, so to speak. I got into coaching originally. I was taking a combatives class at Stanislaus and had the wrestling coach from Turlock High at the time, Anthony Blue, was teaching the class at Stanislaus. It was like a PE class and looked for a volunteer to demonstrate. He was doing a gut wrench, broke my ribs in demonstrating that. And then 2 weeks later, hit me up about coaching and got me into it, helping out with the club and a little bit with the high school, and put a polo on me and put me on the bus to go to an away dual meet with them. And it was cool and got the buzz for it there. And then coached youth wrestling out in Turlock for about 6 years. Had a lot of success. And then my
Let's pause
wife
there. Go back to
yeah,
high school really quickly. I know you're from the
yeah,
Valley, but take us through the quick high school journey.
yeah, like my own high school. Absolutely. So I'm actually from the Valley, from Turlock originally, but went to high school up at Bret Hart, up in Angels Camp. I had a great wrestling coach, football coaches up there. Great experience, had some success, not uber high level, especially when we talk about wrestling and the success of the programs I've been involved with. But I was a pretty good wrestler. Had a coach actually out of this area. Jan Schultz was a San Jose State wrestler. I think he wrestled there in the 60s. And then Watsonville grad Dave Barnes actually was a coach for me up there as well. His son was in my graduating class. So he helped out coach and
That's where
had a
we
great
used to have
experience there.
the cross country championships at
Yes, yeah,
Calaveras
Frogtown.
County.
Yep. Frogtown, Calaveras County, Jumping Frog Jubilee. And so, yeah, it was good experience up there. I really enjoyed it. After high school, went out to Illinois to a Division III school, played football and wrestled out there for a minute, but missed California. And so came back to Turlock where my family was at, went to Stanislaus, got a degree in criminal justice, was doing some social work, and then had some extra time. And so was doing the youth wrestling thing. And the program, that club at the time was pretty successful, had 5 high school state champions that came out of there that were in the club just like the year before. And it was one of those power clubs where a lot of kids from around the area would go there. And then so that
Was
coach
that
kind
the
of
same
bounced.
one? Sorry to interrupt, but the
Yeah.
Houston kids would go to. A couple of my college
Yes.
roommates were
Yeah.
Houston like
So
wrestling legends.
so both Corey Borges and Billy Murphy, who were state champions for Houston, wrestled in the Turlock Club there. And so those two plus Lewis Bland, who went on to Central Catholic, won a couple state championships, actually played football at Washington State, did pretty good there. He was a state champ. So Luis Gonzalez as well. And then Trevor Machado Ching went to Oakdale, won a state championship there. So the the coach at the time though bounced, and then it got put onto my plate. And I was just new. I was 22 years old, kind of doing some stuff and really figured it out, but had a lot of support, had some success. And so really got the bug for it there. And at the time, my wife, I got a job at Los Banos as a counselor, learning director deal there, and went to a Christmas party and met their principal. And he said, "Hey, I heard you coach wrestling. Why don't you come coach with us? And while you're at it, why don't you teach?" And I was like, "Whoa, okay." And so figured out how to get into credential program. He hired me as an interim teacher slash coach, was an assistant coach there for a year. They had a really seasoned coach that had been there for a long time, but he and I had different views on some things. And Pacheco High School was opening up in Los Banos at the time or the next year. And I talked to the principal and the AD, and we had 2 quality coaches and 2 different schools needed to open. One was opening up. And so I really wanted to stay at Los Banos. Dan Roten was the other coach. He got the opportunity to go to Pacheco. And so I took over the program at Los Banos. And that was great. And the funny thing was, we had that presentation with Clink yesterday. And is it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday. And going over those program values and those things. And that's right out of the gate. And I don't know if it was my time as a youth coach and seeing what high school programs looked like, but I, right out of the gate, had my values that I wanted to instill in the program and all of these expectations and attendance and everything and high standards. And it proved pretty successful. We actually won the CCC for the first time ever. My first year as head coach at Los Banos. We beat Turlock for the first time in program history. We won 4 consecutive conference titles there. And so had some success, a lot of good stuff going on there. There was a changeover with our administration. The principal that recruited me, hired me, great guy, Dan Martin, didn't get along with the superintendent. And so, as those things go, man, it went south. He got reassigned to the bus barn, like just some weird stuff. And so, ultimately, it was like, okay, it might be time to look elsewhere. And as with anything, especially with wrestling or any athletics, Clovis is a mecca for athletics and definitely for wrestling. And so, looked that way. And Clovis North at the time was had an opening, and the AD at the time was your boy Eric Swain. And so, had a meeting with him, and he was in full salesman mode. He's like, "Do you have a PD credential?" I'm like, "No, I could probably get that." Because the toughest decision we want our coaches to make in the morning is whether you're wearing sweats or shorts and all those things. And but then he moved on to a higher position, and Kobe Lindsay was the AD that hired me. And 3 years at Clovis North, we had some success there. Turned the program around. My first year, we had our first state champion in wrestling for Clovis North. Austin Flores went on to Stanford, graduated there. He's working for Apple now, doing some great things and some
Wasn't
great
Street
relation.
there too as the AD at one
Yes.
point? Okay.
Yeah. He was the Granite Ridge AD, so the junior high there. He's currently the AD at Clovis North, so he took over that role. Street Dog's a good guy as well. Clovis North's interesting because it is a basketball school. You got Tony Amundsen there, and
Yep.
and they got a great gym and a lot of things going on with basketball and some success there. But had a great time with wrestling there. And then it was a weird deal. Ultimately, I woke up one of those kind of Jerry Maguire middle of the night cold sweats thing, worried that I was missing out on a lot of my kids' stuff. And my kids were athletes, are very active. My daughter Emily was like a 5-sport athlete in high school. My son Albert was just wrestling, but uber committed, great student stuff as well. And really then looked at maybe I want to do the administration thing, right? And looking for a kind of an AD job or something along those lines. And opportunity opened up at Clovis East and became the assistant AD out there for a couple of years. My daughter was going to school, starting her freshman year there when I went out there. It was great fit. Loved the community at Clovis East. Clovis North was good too. It's the Beverly Hills of Clovis. Clovis East is the east side, the other side of the tracks. Great diversity, a lot of great work ethic, great relationships with all the staff there, the kids. And so I was doing that for 2 years. And then my son was going to be coming up through the high school program, and they were struggling and trying to figure out the coaching thing. And so ultimately ended up throwing my name back in the hat to being the head coach there at Clovis East. So did that for 4 years. And then it was like, okay, Albert's going to be graduating, looking for an AD type role. That's ultimately what I wanted to do, and coaching coaches and helping that in that respect. And you get on EdJoin or whatever and saw Gilroy, and I was like, wow, that's interesting. And reached out to DC, our wrestling coach, and he's whatever you need, we'll do it. Like, let's make it happen. That's just how DC operates. But reached out to Greg Kopiku, the principal here, and had a great meeting, great tour, and interview went well and all that, and kind of got hired. Interestingly, before you move to a different school or doing some things, there's probably some questions that I know now that you need to ask, right? What is everything? What is the lay of the land? What does the support look like, and budgeting and all that stuff? But that was coming into it, the fun challenges that I got to take on here. And Gilroy's a very unique place, a lot of history and tradition in athletics and our different programs. Obviously, wrestling's pretty good, but field hockey and softball, and we had a tradition in football and trying to bring that back, and virtually all our sports. And so it's a good time to be a Mustang and be here, but there's definitely a lot of work. And then the CCS is an interesting place to be as well. It's a lot different than the Valley in some good ways and some other challenges, right? So I always try to bring that stuff up in our league meetings and CCS meetings and stuff, but it's
All right, well,
been
I'm
good so
looking
far.
forward to digging into all that. This is year 3 or 2? Year 3, right?
Yeah, they're coming in year 3 this year. Yep.
All right, love that. So let's go right to what you just said. When you get a job, you start thinking about questions you should have asked. So what are those? Because the whole intention of this is to be a digital database of mentorship, right? So coaches
Yeah.
getting into it, administrators getting into it, coaches changing jobs. What are the things that you realize that you need to figure out? And I want to go way back to your coaching career, but let's stay on the admin thing right now and go,
Yeah.
okay, what are those questions that once you got there, you're like, damn, I should ask this?
Some of it, like things that you take for granted, like virtually everywhere else, eligibility is pretty standard, right? Minimum 2.0. And sometimes a school might have slightly higher, 2.5 or something like that. But we have a very unique high standard here. And you have to have a minimum 2.0, no Fs. If you struggle in math and maybe your math teacher's not great or whatever the reason is, if you get an F, you're ineligible, right? Even if your other grades are good. And so we run into that. We also have a citizenship grade that can be based on your citizenship in the classroom, or it could be your attendance, tardies, unexcused absences and stuff. So if you have 2 N's, you're ineligible. And then the fourth layer is our community service requirement. You got to have a minimum of 20 hours of community service a year. And so that those four layers were put us up against it. And we have a lot of students that don't meet that. And so our numbers are down and so struggling with that, right? So what does eligibility look like is a big piece. It's unique here, right? So learning that lesson, I would ask it the next time. And then what are your facilities? And you take a tour and everything looks good, but what does the schedule look like? What are outside groups that are using your facility? What are the needs and updating? We don't have a practice field. We have a turf field at the stadium that's great. In a lot of ways, we host the CCS track meet there and do all that. The lights are burning out there. We don't have a practice field because the Gopher took that over, and during COVID, it went to heck. And so you have field hockey, football, band, preseason soccer, everybody trying to use the field. And then we're also the home field for Gavilan football. So that's on Saturdays. The Gilroy Browns, our youth football team, uses it on Sundays. Our gym doesn't have AC. There's a lot of things like that you would want. And you take a tour and you see it, but you don't know exactly. And then organizationally, like on the departments you work with, what is the relationship with activities look like? What is your ASB office like? That's been a great opportunity here. Our ASB office, our accounting clerk, our activities director are on board. My admin team is awesome, but we run up against board policies sometimes that aren't our board is supportive of athletics, and we have some of our cabinet members at the district level. Their kids play sports for us and do that kind of here, so I get to connect with them. But it's not a priority explicitly, right? Athletics isn't a top 5, definitely not like a top 3. Whereas in Clovis, they wear their values on the sleeve. They say it out loud. And you could laugh at it. It's crazy. It's like Texas, but they're explicit about it. Yeah, it's explicit. And come in here, like, what are the values of the school and the district? How does athletics fit into that? And navigating that now. But I think you could ask those questions right out of the gate to try and figure that stuff out.
Let's do that then, because I've joked on this a million times, especially when I talk to my friends from Clovis. It's Texas.
Yeah.
And for people that don't know what I mean, can you get into that a little bit? So you're at Los Banos, you go to Clovis, and you're like, holy cow, this is way different. And now you're back at Gilroy. But in that middle section, can you just try to capture for people that don't know what I mean by it's Texas?
Yeah, and athletics. So it starts at a young age, right? Every elementary school in Clovis, there's 34 elementary schools, I think almost 35 now, that all have elementary athletics. They got a tackle football team. They have volleyball, they've got softball, they got baseball, wrestling, obviously. And so cross country, track, like they have a number of sports there. And those kids come up having that experience. And then junior high has 23 different sports, right? Including water polo and swim. And they, even at the junior high level, they have access to world-class facilities. Their football fields at the junior high level are on each campus, right? But they're like laser cut grass that is super nice to play on. And so they're spoiled a little bit, but that's the expectation that it is a top 3 priority. Right? They believe in the development of the student mind, body, and spirit, right? And that body piece is a big part of it in athletics. And then at the high school level, you have world-class facilities, right? And their high expectations of their teams. When I was coming from the outside, there were 2 things that I knew about Clovis, or you heard in the coaching realm, is 1, they have elementary sports, which is cool because you have an automatic feeder program. But 2 is if you don't win, you can get fired, which isn't common everywhere necessarily. And they've had coaches, especially in football, that would make it to the Valley Championships, and then all of a sudden they're being let go because they didn't win, or those kind of things. And there are high standards, right? And all of that was new to me. Los Banos I had a great experience. It's a very normal place. They have good facilities and high expectations and all of that stuff. But when you go to Clovis, it's like you're hit, and it feels like a cult at first, right? They talk about their values. Like, where else does that happen, right? Like in a public school setting, where else, you don't see that a lot, where they're constantly talking about what's important to them. And so that seemed weird, but after a while, you get used to it and you embrace it. And then when you're talking to parents and they're like, why didn't this, that? We're not going to apologize for having high expectations. This is what's going on, and your son or daughter's not meeting that expectation. And so that's where they're at. Or so all of those things. So eventually it becomes a great place to be in that. But at the same time, they worry about things a lot, when they worry about perception and the view from the community and different things. And so there's some added stressors that, you don't see other places as much, but it definitely was an amazing place to be. And I go down there a lot for wrestling events and different things, and have a lot of great friends. down in Clovis as well. So yeah, it's a special place, but it is a little crazy in that respect.
And so the transition to Gilroy and
Yep.
to the Central Coast section, as you mentioned, right? You spend the majority of your life in the Central section. I think Los Banos is part of the Sac Joaquin, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So
so
I
you've
was
had
coaching originally there.
three section experience. Give me
Yep.
your perspective on the things that are demonstrably different. And I don't want to say better or worse because it's all feel and where you cut your teeth. But
Yeah.
what's demonstrably different and how things are handled for people that are maybe in a different section looking at different ways to do things?
I think the thing that struck me right away with the CCS is the sheer number of staff like that we have at the CCS office and the rules that are in place that are different than other places. And then because you have so many rules on things, like you have to have people that are overseeing this stuff administratively. And whereas like in the central section, they have three people at the central section office: your commissioner, your assistant commissioner, and then their secretary. And they allow a lot of the school districts and leagues to help run championship events. As an example, with wrestling, they have their Wrestling Masters Championship at Selland Arena in Fresno. But Madera Unified has a strong athletic program, and their ADs and Clovis and a lot of these ADs come together and help run championship events. And they just will guide it. Whereas in the CCS, these championship events, we've got to staff it. We've got to have a CCS office person there. There's a lot of things in play. And so it seemed different. And then some of the stuff, it was like random things that I brought up. Like it's funny, but we were charging wrestlers for their weight assessment, like cash, right? Which was obviously not done elsewhere. And then we changed those rules. But it's been some of those kind of things. The Sac Joaquin section is obviously a big section geographically, a lot of schools. I had great relationship with Will DeBoard, who's there. Interestingly, he was working for the Modesto Bee and interviewed me when I was in high school. I have a picture of him interviewing me while I'm sitting on the bench in like 1995. And then when Pete Sacco was there as the commissioner, had great experiences, that kind of stuff. And then the central section, though, when I went, because the Sac Joaquin section is very organized, but not a ton of staff and whatever. When I went to the central section, it was definitely the Wild West down there, or it felt that way, because there wasn't a lot of organization and control. And the commissioner at the time was a pretty good guy. The assistant commissioner was interesting, but they had a change fairly recently, and their new leadership has been great. And so seeing that, and I got to see the tail end of that, and then coming out to the CCS, and Dave Grissom's awesome, and Marco and all the crew, it's just is different. And you have San Jose schools and the Bay Area and just a different mix. But I think sometimes we miss out because Gilroy, we're South County of South Santa Clara County, but we have a working class community. And then I feel like there's a lot of that in the Salinas Valley and in some of these other schools in the PCAL or wherever that need to be represented as well. We're not just uber high achieving academic schools, those with means that are maybe in the San Jose area, but you got East Side as well as San Jose. And I'm always trying to advocate for that kind of stuff. And that I brought it up in our meeting with that rule in the, what is it, Article 5, Section 4 about the off-season training. If you're limiting that to 4 kids on one coach, and it sounded like a COVID hangover, but that was trying to combat football coaches going crazy and saying you got to train football all year round. I get it, but that seems like it could be a site, a league, or a district could fix that stuff and implementing things. But to create a section rule, we're all caught up in that. And so it pushes kids to then go to club stuff. There's some communities that have greater access to that, and there's some that don't. And, where we're at, there's some limitations on some club access. And then definitely in other parts in the South Salinas Valley, my wife works out and King City with the district there. And I can imagine those kids don't have as much access to stuff. So when you limit it to say the high school coach can't help them, this much in the off season, it puts some limitations there.
Yeah, just that. Yeah, it's interesting coming from Sac Joaquin to hear myself
Yeah.
the way they did it. And it's funny because they're actually moving towards a different model now, where my buddy was just talking to me, who's in that district or that section still, where they're doing it like college now, where you have 8 weeks outside of the season to practice, or it's 20 hours,
Right.
or whatever. It's crazy. And so they basically at his new school basically have just year-round sports and single sport athletes, and they're not sharing anymore because of that. And the CCS rule has been in existence since I got here in 2008, and the whole intention was to prevent coaches from keeping them hostage year round and wanting them to go do other things. And so there's no perfect model, and everybody
No.
tries different things. And ultimately, you're trying to keep the student at the center of the equation, and you win some, you lose some. But so if you were to look at yourself as a coach now and you go back to Los Banos when you get your first head job, you go back and be a head coach again, what are some of the things that you've developed over time that you consistently take with you? It's like, this is the best thing we do, and I'm going to implement this wherever I go. And you're not necessarily coaching at Gilroy, but you have
Right.
some thoughts and some ideas and some tangible and tactile things that you can now offer your coach and saying, hey, this is transformational. You might want to think about this. Can you go through your list of tools that maybe you want to share with the rest of the world that you have found successful no matter where you've been?
Yeah, and when I came to Gilroy, I was as a first time AD out here. It was I'm going to see what everybody is doing, and obviously some of the programs are having success or just seeing what it is. And one of my I would say mistakes is not implementing or sharing exactly how I would do things as much. And coming into year 3, I've made it very clear about some of my expectations because we struggle with things like commitment. And one of the things that I did first at Los Banos was in order to compete or play, you have to attend practice, right? And if you don't come to practice on Monday, you're not competing on Wednesday. And it would be week by week. So you could redeem yourself the next week or whatever. But one, you're not showing the commitment to the team and doing all these kind of things. But two, you're not prepared, right? And in other sports, there might be plays in wrestling, you got to physically be prepared. The coach before me in Los Banos, his rule was if you weren't at practice the day before a meet, you couldn't compete. Dual meets are on Wednesdays. All of a sudden, everybody show up on Tuesday, but nobody was coming on Monday. So the commitment to attendance was big. When I took over, and I would encourage any coach to lay out their values, a lot of the nuts and bolts of things I've stole from different coaches. I used to attend a lot of coaches clinics. In fact, Monterey used to have a great wrestling coaches clinic every year. Went away with COVID, but they'd have coaches come out from PA and Iowa and everywhere else. And so you'd steal some of that and put it into your own. Another thing is I would have fewer rules, right? You have high expectations, but you don't want to enumerate 10, 15, 20 different rules because then you got to enforce all of that. And so my rules were be on time, be professional, and work hard. And so the professional side is that kind of catch all, right? You have kids that are doing stupid stuff and you'd hold them accountable with that and talking to their parents. But it was easier to communicate to that, to our athletes and to parents that these are our expectations. And then I also, to me, everything mattered. I'm a little OCD on stuff. So branding and spirit pack stuff was important. Looking like part of the team. Like you want to hide your worst guy. So have him look like he's part of the team. In wrestling, you be at a place and you got some high level guys and then you got some mid level and maybe some lower level guys, making sure everybody looks like they're a wrestler, right? And ensuring they have a team t-shirt and a warm up and they're looking the part. When the team feels good, looks good, they perform well. And surprisingly, that stuff matters. So I would pay attention to that. And that's the expectations I have with my coaches here. But also knowing that you have kids that maybe don't have the means to buy a spirit pack. So we're giving out stuff like, hey, make sure you give out a team t-shirt every year. And over the course of a 4-year career, they got plenty of stuff. You can't say, why aren't you wearing something that looks like you go to Gilroy or Los Banos or wherever? We give you that stuff. And then our school gives out things like that, t-shirts every year and that stuff as well. And it's funny because I know you're big on branding and I am too. Like, if you ask people, if I asked you, what are the colors of Gilroy High School? What would you say? Like, you can look at what I'm wearing, but traditionally, what?
Blue. My wife is a Gilroy alum. So
Yeah,
we have stuff from the 90s, but it's blue, white, and then there's yellow gold trim on it as
gold.
well.
Yeah, yeah. So blue and gold was coming from the outside. I thought blue and gold was our colors. And so our actual school colors from the founding of the school are blue and white, right? Royal and white. But a lot of our alumni, it's the gold, they want to bring that back. And so you can imagine how you have those conversations and stuff. But I think it's important to have a consistent image across all of our programs and as a coach. And I think offering, and this is why like my success a lot was just out working and out organizing sometimes some other coaches. It's hard to say that, but the off-season stuff and the gains that can be made either in the weight room or in wrestling and obviously other sports, the outside training opportunities or opportunities to compete were big. And so we would make gains. I would make sure that all of my kids had that opportunity, had the information they needed. In Los Banos and definitely in Clovis, I was a year-round coach. And so in the CCS, there's some of that expectation. Our school district, and this is the other thing, like our stipends are terrible, right? So one of our challenges here at Gilroy is dealing with that. But providing those opportunities. And if you're a coach, and I respect the coaches that are in-season coaches, so to speak, but we got to make sure that we're giving the kids the opportunity, the information they need to get plugged in elsewhere if they're not playing that second and third sport, some of those opportunities as well. That's what worked for me, is just being super organized, making sure you have a calendar of your entire year, what the preseason, what in season, what off season looks like, the practice schedule, and that 4 month schedule, right? 4 pages, 2 sheets back to back that they can put on the refrigerator, and then sticking to that, right? Like, it obviously there can be some changes, and I've worked with some of the best coaches in the state, and down in Clovis, Troy Tirapelli Buchanan might come into the room with a certain plan and then get a feel for where the athletes are at, and you got to change it up. And your practice time might still be the same. I try not to change that because parents, families, everybody expects that, but you might have to modify and make those adjustments on the fly. But at least everybody knows that we're blocking out these times for practices. We have these competitions, these tournaments going on, so they can schedule around it. Because as a winter coach, if we took every vacation time, holiday off, we'd have no season left. And so you got to be prepared, and talking with parents and athletes, like what Thanksgiving looks like, what the winter break looks like, what all those Monday holidays look like, and just clear communication on that. But if they have a calendar that you shared with them, you get much better attendance too.
No doubt. In regards to you as primarily a wrestling guy, right? Your daughter played water polo. You said she's a 5-sport athlete. You know where I come down on the multi-sport thing. So, what have you taken away from your colleagues? What have you been able to implement both as a wrestling coach and as an administrator, where you are trying to open people's lens a little bit, trying to help them zoom
Yeah.
out, and don't be so hung up on what you're doing in this specific discipline, but let's see how these other disciplines can not only inform you as a coach and a teacher, but can also help your athletes. Can you share a little bit
Yeah.
about that journey specifically with your kid and then you as a coach and an AD?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a proponent of participating in multiple sports. I was a multi-sport athlete in high school and even in college. And my daughter kind of followed suit. But the interesting part is she was very talented athletically. So it lends itself to that. Now, our conversations with coaches, when it was great in Los Banos and even in Clovis, you just have clear conversations about sharing time, right? Because the summer then can become a free for all, and you could say it's football heavy, but we work with our coaches to ensure that they have other things. If there's a camp going on for wrestling, or there's some tail end of track, or they got summer baseball or things going on, that we're sharing athletes, and then the adults in the room can schedule around that, right? If one program needs to go, if you got basketball and football, let's run football in the morning while it's still cooler, and basketball's in a gym and they can go at a later time. And the same thing with wrestling, and just trying to, the adults in the room, creating schedules that allow kids to make the choice. But I also see the other side of it. If a kid like my son, he was a one sport athlete, and then that's what really interested him in wrestling. And dad was a coach, which was great. Okay. But I tried to plug him into different, as a young kid, he did swimming all the way up through junior high, tried to get him into water polo, even tried to get him into football. I played football, my dad played football, and I wouldn't necessarily advise all the time. I know there's some challenges with it, but he just wanted to fixate on wrestling and academics. And so ensuring that he had opportunities. So there's kids like him. When we look at pro athletes, and you hear stuff in the news all the time, pro athletes saying that they were a multi-sport athlete, and they're proponents of those are freakily gifted people, right? And so if you're a professional athlete, you could have showed up for badminton and won there. You could have showed up for this and done that and probably done everything. So those kids definitely, and we need to share those. Like at a school like Gilroy, where we're limited on the physical bodies. You don't have a lot of kids over 6 foot. You don't have a lot of this or that. And so if you do, we're trying to make sure that they're making an impact on all 3 seasons as much as possible. But at the same time, if you have a kid that's going to super specialize, then allowing that and understanding that. We run into it with wrestling. Obviously, our wrestling program is pretty good. And some of those kids are literally some of the best in the country. And they used to play football, or they could play football, and we could definitely use them. But at the end of the day, now with NLI and everything else, like there's a pretty high, it used to be your full ride at risk, but now we're talking, some of our guys are getting 6 figures or more at the next level. And so it's really hard to risk getting injured in that. But funny thing is, they're still getting injured doing off-season, preseason tournaments and stuff too, but whatever.
No doubt. What about from a coaching standpoint? What have you found that's transferable purposefully yourself?
Yeah.
Like I played football.
Yeah, well, absolutely. No, for sure. So some of my best athletes say with wrestling, they played football and they took time off. And that could be for anything. It could be for another sport or literally just taking time off. And we're talking a period of months where they come back and they've made gains. There's just something about it where either growth and maturity or some of the crossover skill sets, speed and agility, explosiveness, positioning, all of the other things. As a coach, I've always been a proponent of it. And time and again, I've seen kids come back with some greater skills. And some of it, again, some of it might be attributed to maturity and growth, but I think a lot of it a fresh set of eyes. If I've had kids that have tried to be wrestling only and train year round, and then you're borderline burnout. And so I'll kick kids out in the fall. Okay, we're going to take a month off. I don't want to see you. I want you to go do whatever, be a kid. But even the football players that, were did some stuff in the spring and then were around a bit in the summer and then they just do football all fall, they'll come back in the winter with a ton of motivation. And sometimes it was because they had success in the football field, and sometimes it was because they didn't have success on the football field, but we were successful in wrestling. And so they'd come out fired up to really unleash it there. And so I see that with
what about things you purposefully as a coach have stolen from the basketball team or from the tennis team or whatever? Just things that like we often get tunnel vision. Like I can only go talk to other basketball coaches to figure out how to coach, which is crazy. But it took me a while to figure out. And I always use this story. I sit here and watch water polo practice every day, and it's the same game. But it's like I would have never thought, let me go talk to the water polo coach about how to run transition.
I think that's a big challenge. I don't want to say challenge. It would be a great skill that for ADs to have is doing some of that crossover transference and sharing of knowledge amongst our coaches. I unfortunately at Gilroy have a lot of off-campus coaches, so coordinating regular head coach meetings can be super challenging, if not impossible. In Clovis, we had monthly directors of sport meetings. So in Clovis, you're not just a head coach, you're a director of wrestling or director of football. And so we'd have these monthly meetings and information can be shared, the general check the box kind of stuff, but good ADs would also share what as an AD, I was at these guys practice, I see what they do. And then, hey, why don't you share that at our next DOS meeting? I think that's important. And so seeing what some of these other coaches do in terms of relationship building, I was an organized guy. I wasn't the biggest relationship guy. Like I have relationship with some of my athletes and stuff to this day, but I've seen coaches that have gotten an amazing amount of energy out of their athletes by just connecting with them and be sure. And they make that a priority. They make it a daily, if not weekly, daily priority to check in with the kids that respond well to that and building those relationships. And so others, like I said, most of what I've gotten, I've stolen from other coaches in that sense. And so the organizational piece, the morning workouts or check-in, there's just different scheduling things that have benefited me. Some of the less rules, like I initially was stealing some stuff and all of a sudden this rule sheet is kind of long, and had a coach that kind of told me that may not be the way to go and see and what the way they were working. And I've seen it now. Trying to implement that as an AD is a challenge, but I always share. I've got he's actually the honor coach for boys water polo this year. Doug Pickford is an amazing coach. He's a great communicator. He sends out that weekly email that lays out where we're at each day, what we're doing, what the release time is. And so I try to share that with my other coaches. More is more with communication. And so sharing, if you want your athletes to show up and be where they're supposed to be, and you want, more importantly, I guess, their parents to ensure that they're where they need to be, you need to have that communication piece. Trying to steal those kind of things from our coaches and share it with our other coaches.
So pivoting now. So you're in year 3 at Gilroy. You try to show up to everything, all the athletic director association stuff, the conferences. You're always trying to add things to the tool belt. What are some things you've adopted over the last 3 years that you didn't have before that you would be remiss if you didn't have moving forward?
Yeah, I think, and I haven't been at this year going to putting the conference on the schedule, the state conference, and want to check that stuff out. And that's part of what I missed. And even some of the takeaways, and there was little things, even like with GoFan and then switching to Huddle, the social media piece, you shared Gipper right out of the gate. And so I jumped on board with that, and it was great for social media. And then I learned that you can do the same thing with Canva for free, but I've been doing that. So really just hearing what everybody else is doing. And I think part of it helped put things into perspective for me. Like I said, the CCS felt weird when you're coming from the outside, but then learning where some of these other ADs and how their districts even handle athletics, it makes sense. And so I understand that a lot of our ADs aren't full-time. Like I'm fortunate to be a full-time, full release AD here. And so coming from the Central Valley, Clovis, all the ADs are full-time out there. Joaquin section is a mixed bag. You usually might be teaching a couple periods and probably coaching. In Clovis, you're not, if you're an AD, you're not coaching anymore. Here you see a lot
Yeah,
of
if
that,
you're a
right? We have,
coach, you're not teaching anymore.
yes, that schedule was pretty great. As a head coach in Clovis, you're definitely well taken care of. But seeing what some of our colleagues as ADs are doing, and some of them are head coaches, right? Like they might be the head football coach, which in and of itself is a lot. And so I'm more patient. Sometimes I'll shoot an email or whatever. And if I don't get a response right away, these people are in the classroom teaching or they're doing other things. So understanding that. But I think the professionalism has been great, stealing some things and what when we do the little roundtable stuff and hearing what other sites are doing in other districts, I think it's been great in terms of little specifics. And some of it, like even when we heard Clink talk yesterday, it's like it reminded me of the old coaches clinics I go to where if you're listening to them and 90% of the stuff you're already doing, that it's just reaffirming, right? And so sometimes I'll hear our ADs talk and, oh yeah, we're doing that. Or I need to go back to doing that, right? Like things that you forget about and you want to circle back to or used to be a priority. And so that kind of
Uh,
stuff.
what are some of the things that when you came in and you're sitting there in that room, and I remember you being there, and it's okay, we got all this different stuff in the CCS, and this is stupid, and we shouldn't be doing this. And I came in the same way years ago. But what are some of the things, if you reflect, that you were having those initial knee-jerk reactions, but now a couple of years later, you realize that you can't really undo that because the dominoes that are connected to all of this, right? Because you and I might sit there and go, what are we doing? This is simple. Let's do this. But then you're not seeing the unintended consequences 3 steps down the line. Are there anything you can reflect back on and go, okay, that makes a whole lot more sense because now I see how it's intertwined 4 steps forward?
It's definitely hard to pull like specific examples, but I know I came in and inherited our wrestling team being on probation. And one of the things was because we competed too soon, right? In Clovis and virtually everywhere else, the season of sport doesn't align with the CCS. Saying, why don't we have it lined up with everybody else? There was a reason for that. And Dave does a great job where talking about the state wants to go and start football in July and then put everything else. All of the seasons are connected in that. And we want our athletes to have this break, to have this time. Like we're trying to, at the end of the day, try to protect our athletes from ourselves. And you start to see bigger picture. The longer I've been here, the more this stuff makes sense. Right. And just like when I got to Clovis, it seemed weird from the outside and the values into things. But after a while, those things start to make sense. So it's hard to pick out individual things, but I was patient. I brought up stuff and ask questions. And there was, as long as there's legit explanations of it and why we're doing the things we do. I also think that they struggle. It's funny, but they struggle staffing the postseason events, right? Like your playoffs and getting people to work this or that. In the central section on the valley, they had this figured out with profit sharing. And so I brought it up and it made me laugh when Dave Grissom gets up there and says, hey, the CCS has too much money. We need to give that back to the schools. Or they were like, we'll give it back on administration fees or administrative fees. Well, I don't want that. I don't want it to give it back because the district pays for that. Most of us have districts that pay for those. But if you're hosting these events, you should take care of your host schools, right? Because they're the ones that are usually putting a lot of work, effort, people, manpower, their facilities on the line. Because we're meeting in the middle, which is nice, right, in Gilroy. And so we host a CCS track meet, and there's a lot of volunteers, a lot of coaches, a lot of ADs that help out with that. We get parking, and which is a great fundraiser. We have snack bar, which is great, but entry fees. And they talk about wrestling that they're always struggling to find that spot. Watsonville has taken a number of times and been great about it, but I think they should be taken care of. Right. And so bringing that up, and Dave is looking at it and those kind of things. But I'm like, some of those doesn't make sense. Everywhere else, the Sac Joaquin section, they do a profit sharing model where you pay a bunch at the beginning and they give stuff back. But the central section had that stuff figured out. Like I said, there's districts and ADs that really help to work those events and make sure that they pull off.
As you think about, you now got a kid out of college like I do. Then you got both of yours, maybe one's still in college, but
Yeah.
I've got one in college, one out, and one still in high school. And in your role as the AD and your wife's role as a district office person in another district, I'm always curious about how we're challenging our belief system and the things that we've done or we've been dug in on and how we're looking at that going, hey, you know what? That's probably not serving anymore. So I'm always curious what's something you've recently and purposefully changed your mind on based on exploring the why. It doesn't have to be
Right.
coaching related. It can be anything. That's why I threw out all those other variables. But I don't think, especially in the modern political atmosphere that we live in, where, the tribalism persists and the algorithms just push you into these echo chambers, that we do enough time thinking about what we believe and why and how we challenge those beliefs. So, thoughts on that?
I think both of my kids' athletics was a big part of their lives coming up. And so our family believed in the values that you can learn and participate in athletics. My daughter leans very conservative. She went to Cal Poly. She was an ag kid and thought that would be a very conservative school, but it's a state school. And we have some great conversations about keeping an open mind. And like you said, in the political landscape that we're in now and the bipartisan pull in every direction and social media and everything. I just try to keep my kids educated on keeping an open mind, understanding different perspectives, their strengths on all sides of arguments. And I think athletics has been a big part of that, where they've had to deal with teammates and coaches that have a variety of present a variety of challenges just even outside of the sport, just dealing with personalities. And that's a micro extent of that at a bigger level. And my son Albert is at UCLA, and he was a one sport athlete, but a super student, graduated second in his class. And he's at UCLA. There's a lot of political turmoil and things that he has seen on campus and things going on there and seeing that play out. And I think he's well equipped for having those conversations and trying to, everybody can be a friend and having some civil discourse. And then I think that's important when we, as athletic directors, are working with administration or districts. And for us, we have a large Hispanic population in Gilroy, and we've got to be sent our school site administration and definitely our district administration very sensitive to some of what our Hispanic community is dealing with. And as an AD, and our coaches have to be understanding of that. And so we've been very supportive, understanding that school is a safe place for our kids for a variety of reasons. And I think that's all important. And again, athletics can be a vehicle for that, some of those values.
Is there anything specific in your walk through the world that you've changed your mind on in the last year, let's say? I was over here and now this is where I'm at. And here's the reason why. To that point where we're trying to encourage our students and our colleagues and our children to see the whole landscape and find their truth within versus being told something. And it's so I just always like to try to get an example of, hey, you know what? This is where I've pivoted and here's why. And it's been great. And I might pivot again later, but that's what I'm after, coach.
Yeah, I after seeing, so I've always been uber high standards across the board on things. And I've been in places that I quote unquote seem normal, whether Los Banos, Clovis, those kind of things. And then I come to a place that in Gilroy where like academically our academic policies have uber high standards. But if the support's not there and understanding where kids are at, it's opened my eyes a lot more to understanding that kids have a variety of experiences and we have to take that into play. And so I just try to encourage our coaches to understand where kids are at, what they're doing, but then also still maintaining accountability and high standards. But so those values have always been there. So I wouldn't say the values changed, but I think my understanding and implementation of how I would hold kids accountable for their commitment, like they're making a commitment, right? They want to be part of the team. They want to do these things. And I don't know, it was brought up in our meeting that kids want to do everything or their parents want kids to do everything. That's not a reality. To do 4 things in one season, something's got to give. And I talk at our parent meeting and stuff that, if you're wanting to say do 2 things, whether it's 2 sports or a club and a sport, then you're going to give 200% commitment. Like it's going to take extra time. And does that actually boil down to 200%? Probably not. But if it's not going to be where we're going to split 50-50 on just average time, like you're going to have to do more. And my daughter did that, right? She was a big FFA kid and won Supreme Grand Champion at the Big Fresno Fair with her heifer and these kind of things while she was still playing water polo during the same season and was doing that. And so I've seen it, but that knowing also that your experience, my kid's experience isn't what everybody has. And so you got to take a kid and a family where they're at and try to see it through their lens, through their eyes. I think one of the things I've benefited, and I didn't mention a lot, but I was the first 9 years of my life while I was an undergrad and then first part of my professional career, I was doing social work, working in group homes with foster and probation youth and seeing kids that were all but thrown away by the system and seeing where they were at. And so definitely have an understanding of kids that are on the struggle. When we talk to our teachers, leadership team, and different things about eligibility and kids, like my freshman year, my GPA was a 0.83. Both semesters, like I screwed up fall semester, and I'm going to prove a point that,
Dude, you have to try to do that, coach.
oh, it was bad. It was so bad. And it cost me, right? I couldn't wrestle my freshman year because of my spring grades. I couldn't play football my sophomore year. And then finally, a coach and some teachers got into me a little bit. And, hey, you're only hurting yourself. And then turned things around and ended up going straight to a 4-year school and all that stuff. But understanding that kids might grow out of that and behave a certain way usually because of a reason. And so finding out what's going on. And so I'm sensitive to that. I try to get my coaches and even teachers and leadership team, hey, this kid's been a pretty solid 3.5 athlete, and all of a sudden they got a couple of D's and things going on in there, and then checking in with their counselor and seeing where we're at and ways that they might need some extra help.
And I would imagine, going on that note, where your perspective has shifted, right? Coming in from Clovis, north and east, it's a little different clientele than you're at now. And it's like you can't just come and plug and play the same proposal. It's like you got to modify it, or you're just square peg and round hole. And it's, this kid might not be able to get here because he's got to look after his kids or his siblings, because parents are working multiple jobs. And I think ultimately we come in with this idea of how things are going to go, and we forget to read the room, especially when you're coming into a new place and you miss things and you step on your toes and you do all these other things. And so I want to close with this. If you were to give advice to anybody coming into a new situation, right? So you've been at 3 different places specifically. How do you navigate that initial step? What's the best advice? What's the worst advice?
I think my advice would be to ask the questions, right? To talk to your coaches about what the strengths and challenges are, talking with administration, talking with parents. One of the great things that I've been able to do is build some relationships with some of our kind of booster parent types with different programs that have been to ask questions like, hey, what's the community think about this? What are our parents feeling? Because sometimes I've been fortunate that I haven't had a lot of complaints. Like, things haven't made their way to me that much, knock on wood. But if they're not, then maybe you don't know what's going on, right? And so you got to go out and ask those questions. And so that was a big deal for me. Is I came in with a certain kind of idea, but that might have changed and needed to change based on what my parent input, coaches input, admin, and then even athletes. I talk to athletes about what they think about things and what they want. Dave Grissom shared a good thing. I would hate for Gilroy field hockey to suffer, and our numbers have been down, and we're not as good this year as we were last year or whatever. When you talk about flag football, he shared a good point, and this is one thing that did change my mind, that ultimately the kids should be able to choose what is offered at their school, right? And if the kids want to play flag football, but don't necessarily want to play tennis, water polo, or field hockey, then let's offer a flag football team, right? And so at the end of the day, it sounds trite, but it's about the kids. And so it's their school, and they should be able to choose. We're just here to help them out and guide the process. That's the biggest thing, really, is listening to your stakeholders and finding out what's going on. Understand, and this too, you're not going to know what you don't know. And so I've been humbled in some things. I was like, I've been at Clovis, I've been here, I've been successful and this kind of stuff. This is what works. And then you come to find out that's not normal every place. And so having to adjust that and be dynamic. And that's one of the good things that I've built some skills on. And you build some resume type building skills, those soft skills, and even some hard stuff, things that I never would have thought that I needed to do. I'm in charge of our vans and transportation, things like dealing with that a lot more than I would have ever thought. But just that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's been great learning those lessons, and hopefully we can continue to share that with coaches and ADs. I think it's important. I love what the CCS does with the new AD type clinic stuff and coaching them up. I hope we get more turnout. Julie Berggren, who's a former AD here at Gilroy, she's our principal. She stopped in and she was a little bummed that we didn't have more numbers at the conference yesterday, but I think we got to recruit our own ADs too to come out and be able to make it out to that stuff.
Yeah, Michelle and I were talking about that last night on the phone, and it's like, how do we get more people to attend? And I just said, we got to find out why they're not attending first. And I don't know the answer to that. So maybe you get some data from your BVAL crew. Yeah. I'll get some from ours. But ultimately, yeah, I think those are great events. And the more people we get, the better the fellowship, the better the learning. And get to see other people that you don't normally see, like you.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, Coach, I appreciate you taking the time. Let me know if you need
anything.
Yeah,
it's been great.
And
do, as always, appreciate it.
When you're back down here for the weekend, let's connect.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks, Coach.
Bye.
Later.